They say every empire is built on a lie. For 10 years, I thought mine was built on love, sacrifice, and the raw intellectual property that lived inside my head. The truth was colder, sharper, and far more public. I stood on the grand ballroom stage, wearing the $10 million diamond choker Julian called my crown of success, waiting for my husband, Julian Thorn, to give the toast. Vanguard Ventures, our AI energy firm, had just hit unicorn status. This was our night. But when Julian finally raised his glass, he didn't look at me. He looked across the room, his eyes fixed on Chloe, the young intern barely out of college. His voice, which had once whispered dreams to me in the dark, boomed across the glittering crowd. I want to thank the one person who truly understands my soul, the woman carrying my child, and soon, my wife. The air cracked. Then, Julian reached into his tuxedo pocket, pulled out an enormous solitaire diamond, and slipped it onto Chloe's finger. Right there in front of the board members, the investors, and my mother. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a public, calculated execution of my decade-long marriage, meant to leave me as nothing more than a wealthy, childless spectator. The sound of the applause was deafening, but all I could hear was the metallic click of a trap closing shut. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. My name is Adriana Hayes. I stood rooted to the spot, a pillar of jade silk and frozen disbelief, as the deafening applause that Julian had earned was transferred entirely to the young woman he now openly embraced. The air in the Grand Hyatt ballroom, minutes before celebratory, had turned viscous and cold, clinging to my skin like plastic wrap. On the night Vanguard Ventures, the firm I co-founded and majority-owned, achieved its billion-dollar valuation, I watched my husband not only betray me but publicly announce his engagement to his pregnant lover, Chloe, the $10 million diamond choker. Julian's supposed grand gesture to me now felt like a leash of barbed wire, strangling the remnants of my pride. Every eye in the room, from the junior analysts to the biggest private equity partners, was a pinprick, stitching me into the miserable tapestry of a discarded wife. I saw the triumphant sneer of Dorothea, Julian's mother, who had always viewed me as an obstacle, too smart, too focused, too much woman to simply be her son's accessory. She didn't offer pity. Her expression was one of satisfied, cold victory. My legs moved before my mind fully engaged. I didn't rush, didn't stumble, and most crucially, I did not cry. Crying would have been giving them the scene they craved. Instead, I simply walked, the silk of my gown whispering against the marble floor like a promise of vengeance. I bypassed the stage, bypassed the curious, pitying faces, and headed straight for the relative sanctuary of the women's lounge. Once the latch clicked shut behind me, the ice around my heart began to melt, but not into tears of weakness. It became a hard, silent fury. I leaned my forehead against the cool, mirrored glass, taking deep, shuddering breaths that sounded alien in the silence. My first instinct was to call the only rock I had ever known, my mother, Baroness Cora, the woman who had taught me that true wealth was always backed by power. I pulled out my phone. Cora's name glowed brightly against the darkness of the screen. I typed a single, raw, unedited word and hit send, devastated. The phone rang instantly, her name flashing across the screen, demanding an answer, demanding control. I silenced it, letting her worry. My mother's power was absolute, but the decision to act had to be mine, and I would not be rescued. I would be supported. My fingers, steady despite the earthquake inside my chest, opened my financial application. As the majority shareholder and a co-signatory on the firm's critical line of credit, I still held the reins. I navigated to the collateral agreements, found the $200 million working capital facility secured by our core intellectual property, and executed the action temporary freeze and audit hold. The automated confirmation flashed back, cold and impersonal. That single click meant Vanguard Ventures' liquidity had just dried up by 80%. Julian had won the evening, but I had just burned the boat he was sailing in. I drove away from Midtown, the city lights a meaningless blur through the film of tears that finally began to fall. Not tears of sorrow for the man I lost, but tears of pure, burning injustice. I didn't drive to the luxurious penthouse Julian and I shared. That space was now tainted, an alien vessel. I drove straight to the Connecticut estate, where the true power of the Hayes family resided. Baroness Cora, despite her age and gentle appearance, was the financial matriarch of a sprawling private equity fund, and she was waiting for me. She didn't ask questions. When I walked through the grand oak doors, pale and shaking, she simply wrapped me in a silent, all-encompassing hug. "You're home, Adriana. That's all that matters," she murmured, her words a soothing balm. I finally allowed myself to shatter, collapsing against her, releasing 10 years of repressed ambition, partnership, and now, the agony of utter betrayal. When I finally calmed down, my mother led me into her study. "Tell me everything," she commanded, not as a mother, but as the chairman of a board. She had already activated her network. The freezing of the credit line was brilliant. "Adriana, it buys us time." She then introduced me to Robert Caldwell, an older attorney with a reputation for mercilessly dismantling corporate fraud. A name whispered with dread in the legal backrooms of DCRIC. As I recounted the public humiliation, Caldwell listened intently. But the game changed entirely when my loyal assistant, Ethan, arrived with a briefcase. His face etched with worry. Ethan had been working with me since the company's early startup days, and his loyalty was absolute. He apologized for the intrusion but laid out a stack of documents that confirmed my worst fears. "Ma'am, the betrayal is deeper than infidelity," Ethan stated, his voice low and urgent. "Julian and his mother, Dorothea, have been moving enormous amounts of capital through phantom consulting contracts with a shell company called Apex Solutions. The director is Dorothea's cousin." He paused, his eyes finding mine. "But that's not the worst of it. They recently executed a non-disclosure and intellectual property transfer agreement, moving the core ownership of the Vanguard AI system, your original invention, into that same shell company, which, incidentally, is registered under Chloe's name." The pain I felt then was a physical, searing heat that eclipsed the earlier shame. Julian hadn't just stolen my marriage, he was trying to steal my life's work, the very essence of my contribution, the algorithms I had painstakingly conceived and coded in a cramped college apartment. He had reduced my genius to a commodity to be transferred to his new lover. They meant to use the public scandal and emotional pressure to force a divorce settlement where you would assume all the phantom debt, leaving you ruined and without a single claim to the intellectual property, Caldwell summarized, his voice flat with professional disgust. The battle was no longer for my heart. It was a battle for my honor and for the truth of my own existence. I knew then what I had to do. The next afternoon, I returned to the penthouse, choosing a time when Julian would be preoccupied with the fallout of the frozen credit. The heavy mahogany door felt foreign in my hands. I moved through the apartment, ignoring the ghosts of shared laughter and whispered plans. I went straight to the old file cabinet in the back of the home office. I was looking for one thing: a worn brown, leather-bound notebook. It was not fancy. It was the journal I had kept during my master's program, filled with frantic, hand-drawn diagrams and the very first scribbled lines of code that became the foundation of Vanguard Ventures. This was the proof of my original, sole conception. When my fingers closed around the familiar texture of the leather, a surge of icy confidence replaced the rage. Just as I tucked the notebook and a few encrypted flash drives into my purse, the office door burst open. Julian stood there, disheveled and frantic, his tailored suit now looking like a cheap costume. "What in God's name are you doing here? Adriana, you've collapsed the company. The board is in open revolt, and the banks are calling in the credit line." "Your mother," he started, his voice a frantic accusation. I cut him off with a look so cold it could have frosted the window panes. "My mother is merely observing the consequences of your incompetence, Julian. I, however, am here to observe the consequences of your criminal fraud." I stepped forward. "Did you truly believe I wouldn't discover the phantom contracts, the millions siphoned off, or the transfer of my intellectual property to your little friend, Chloe? You didn't just break our vows, Julian, you broke federal law." He paled, the fear finally replacing the arrogance. He tried to manipulate, reaching out to grab my arm. Adriana, listen to me. We can fix this. I still love you. It was a mistake with Chloe. I was stressed. We can announce a reconciliation. You can unlock the funds. I recoiled as if his touch were poison. Stop. Every word that leaves your mouth is a calculated lie. You didn't make a mistake. Julian, you orchestrated an attempted theft. The man I loved was merely a technical implementer. The man standing before me is a common criminal. I haven't come to beg, nor to reconcile. I came to tell you that you will not get away with this, and I will never sign your unjust divorce agreement. I walked past him, leaving him trembling in the center of the office, his grand life collapsing around him like a house of cards. The confrontation with Julian was the final, necessary act of amputation. 2 weeks later, the war began in earnest at an emergency hearing for an asset freeze and a court-ordered inquiry into Vanguard's financials. Julian and Dorothea arrived with their expensive legal team, radiating arrogance. Julian's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Davis, confidently submitted documents arguing that Adriana was simply an emotional wife trying to weaponize the company's financial stability. And then, he presented their trump card, the so-called prenuptial agreement, which Julian had fabricated to shift all company debt onto me. It was my turn. I didn't need a lawyer to speak for me. As Robert Caldwell spoke calmly about the fraudulent transfers, I walked directly to the witness stand. I didn't use any of the complex financial reports. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old leather-bound notebook. The soft thud as it landed on the heavy oak rail echoed in the silent courtroom. Julian's eyes widened, recognizing the familiar, insignificant object that suddenly held the weight of his entire downfall. Your Honor, I addressed the judge, my voice clear and unwavering. Mr. Thorn's defense rests on the premise that he is the sole technological founder and I am merely a financial partner, thus justifying his ownership of the intellectual property. However, this notebook, I tapped the leather, contains the first-hand, dated, hand-drawn schematics and original algorithms for the Vanguard AI core authored by me over 15 years ago, long before I ever met Julian Thorn. It is the unassailable evidence that I am the intellectual heart of that company, and the property he attempted to steal was never his to give away. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Davis's face went slack. Julian stood up, shouting an incoherent protest, but the judge had already seen enough. The court immediately ordered a full federal investigation into the IP transfer and the shell companies, effectively putting an end to Julian's career and freedom. The battle for Vanguard Ventures was over. I had won the truth. But victory in court was only half the war. I had to prove that my worth was not tied to what I had saved, but to what I could create. Within days of the court ruling, I formally resigned from Vanguard, the company that now represented only betrayal and stagnation. I gathered Ethan and another brilliant engineer, and with the immense silent financial backing of Baroness Cora, I founded Phoenix Solutions. The name was a tribute to my mother's quiet, powerful influence. But the mission was all mine, developing advanced AI for the aerospace sector, a field more complex, more demanding, and infinitely more cutting-edge than the energy sector Julian had dominated. I had learned the hard lesson that if you want to be truly secure, you must build your castle on land only you own. My focus was absolute. I stopped reading the news about Vanguard's inevitable collapse. I stopped answering the frantic, aggressive calls from Dorothea. I simply built 6 months later. As Phoenix Solutions secured its first major defense contract, I received one final, agonizing visitor. Chloe was standing in my new, sterile, downtown office lobby. She was heavily pregnant, her youth visibly drained, and her face was thin with desperation. Adriana, she pleaded, tears welling up as she was ushered in. I know I have no right, but please, I beg you, you've won. Julian is under house arrest and the company is gone. Please, drop the charges, or at least speak to the federal prosecutor. This baby needs a father, a life. You were a couple for so long, can't you find it in your heart to forgive? I looked at the woman who had helped execute the economic crime that almost ruined me. I felt no pity, only a deep, cold certainty. I spoke not with anger, but with finality. Chloe, you are here asking me to risk my reputation and compromise my values to save a criminal who conspired to steal 15 years of my intellectual property. The issue between Julian and me stopped being about a broken heart the moment he tried to make me bankrupt. This is not about your child, and it is not about forgiveness. This is about justice for a crime committed, and I will not interfere with the process. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy. You need to understand something important. When a man shows you who he is, a thief and a coward, you must believe him. Go and deal with the consequences of the choices you both made. She left my office, her sobs echoing down the pristine hallway, and I did not look back. The news broke 12 months after the infamous party. Vanguard Ventures was officially dissolved under Chapter 7 bankruptcy protection. Julian Thorn and Dorothea were both indicted on multiple counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and intellectual property theft. I watched the report on a sleek, integrated screen in the living room of my new, independently purchased penthouse, the same building as the old one, but 3 floors higher with a better view. I was hosting the first company dinner for the Phoenix Solutions team, a group of brilliant minds who valued merit over maneuvering. As I raised a glass of champagne, I didn't toast revenge. I toasted something far more valuable. I felt the familiar weight of the diamond choker around my neck, the one Julian had given me, the one I had refused to sell, choosing instead to wear it as a symbol of the war I fought and won. It was, indeed, the crown of thorns, a reminder that the sweetest victories often begin with the deepest, sharpest pain. I once believed that a woman's greatest achievement was the perfect partnership. I told my team, my voice strong and clear. Today, I know that your intellectual property and your uncompromising value are the only assets that no one can ever truly steal from you. We build this company not on hope, but on unshakable worth, to Phoenix Solutions. I did not return to Julian. I did not visit him in jail. I never offered an explanation, an apology, or a word of closure. The silence I left behind him was the loudest, most permanent ruin of all. He had been erased from my history, not by force, but by the sheer magnitude of my continued, unstoppable success. Julian Thorn had sought to make me bankrupt instead. He had bankrupted his own future, a fate far more satisfying than any tearful confrontation could ever have achieved. I had simply moved on to build a castle so much grander than the one he thought he could conquer. As I raised a glass, I didn't toast revenge. I toasted something far more valuable, the profound realization that true wealth is not found in external titles, but in the unshakable foundation of one's own intellect and integrity. A dramatic collapse is often the necessary clearing for a monumental beginning. The deepest betrayal can become the single greatest catalyst for reclaiming your power and defining your purpose. Never let another person's malice compromise the singular value of your mind. Your intellectual property is the only asset no one can truly steal. Thank you for joining me on this journey of transformation. If this story of resilience resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. Please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a tale of strength and triumph. Until next time, remember, the crown of thorns you wear today is often the crown of victory tomorrow.